Imperial Japanese Navy light cruiser Mikuma. Sunk on the last day of the Battle of Midway. First impressions time. Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff, and today's first impressions video, which focuses on the Mikuma, a 1:350 scale heavy cruiser from Tamiya. Now this is a 2009 tooling that was released at the same time as the Mogami range of kit. So basically this is a part change on the same kit as the Mogami that we built 18 months or so ago on the channel. So you can go and look back and find the full build of the Mogami as an aircraft tender. So the aircraft tender, Mogami, and the Mikuma were released at the same time, and then they did the Mogami in a earlier heavy cruiser setting a year later. So the three kits are all related, so we're going to have a lot of common parts in here. The hull's going to be similar, and so on. What we get with the Mikuma that we didn't get with the Mogami kit is we get the full complement of main turrets and secondary armament at the stern of the ship because she's in her original and intended format. Okay, so we sort of know what to expect from this, but I've actually not delved through the kit, and as we've not really built the back end of this class of heavy cruiser before, there will be some new stuff in there. And for those of you who have not looked at this range of kits before, we're going to take you all the way through the instructions, the sprues, and anything else that's in there. So looking at the box, we've got a nice bit of artwork showing the ship steaming at sea. We can see the funnel there with the white bands, the flag at the end, and it pretty much represents what you're going to get in the kit, although obviously it's an artist's impression of the ship and not a picture of the model. On the side here we can see we've got a couple of side profiles which gives you a better view of what your finished model will look like if you display it full hull. As we look down the side of the box, we can see an image of the photo etch, which appears to predominantly focus on the movement of aircraft. Then we've got some pictures of the completed model in her what I'd describe as a museum standard build, as in not weathered. And then we get an impression of the two ships, waterline and full hull. The ends pretty much replicates what's on the top, tells us we get a little bit of photo etch, and that's it. So let's have a look inside. I always think Tamiya packaging is a little odd. It's about presentation rather than anything else. So we have a little card insert here which has got our photo etch on, then we've got our instructions along with one of the bags of sprue, our stand, another bag of sprue, and everything else is underneath this, and this moves. It's not adding any protection, it's purely for show, and the only thing it's doing for the modeler really is adding some cost, but it does give you a sense of entering into a quality product rather than one big plastic bag and some instructions chucked at the bottom. So I sort of get why they do it, but at the same time think if you're gonna do that, make it have a purpose. But I do like having the photo etch on the card. It has a card backing anyway, but that's making sure that doesn't get damaged, and some other manufacturers could think about that approach, because you know, Tamiya do it, Mini Art do it, everybody else just seems to chuck it in. Okay, as always, let's start with our instructions, and we've got typical for Tamiya ship kits. We've got a landscape orientation building manual that's stapled and is presented in black and white, and let's just have a look. Yeah, it's black and white throughout. On the front cover here, we've got a side view of what you could be building, and then we've got the artist's impression that was on the box cover. Tells us it's a Japanese light cruiser, and that it's 1:350 scale. Also tells us we have some photo etch parts in there. When we open it up, on the first page we have a little bit of history, talking about the light cruiser, from construction all the way to sinking. And I've got to say, this is more accurate than Wikipedia, which describe her as a heavy cruiser. And right at the bottom here is a specification of the ship. What's interesting to read is the armament. Triple 15.5 centimeter turrets times 5. Twin 12.7 centimeter turrets times 4. Twin 25 millimeter cannons times 4. Twin 13 millimeter machine guns times 2. And then 4 triple torpedo launchers. So this thing is heavily armoured, which was the strategy for shipbuilding in Japan at the time. You get the familiar Tamiya tips and thoughts page, which talks about some of the different products. Obviously, they recommend their own range of products, and then there's some tips on painting and so on. So it's always worth reading that, especially if you're relatively new to the hobby. And then we have our little list of paints. Easy to miss if you just thumb through this. It does say paints required there, but it's sort of tucked away. And we've got quite a long list of paints there. Many of them will just be a dab. They're lights and things like that. The rest of the colours, other than your sort of your grey and your hull red and your linoleum, will be on things like the ship's boats. So we're on step 1 now, and as always with Tamiya instructions, there's quite a bit of text around it, and I recommend you read all of that before you start doing anything, because actually this is 2 different options here. We've got waterline, we've got full hull, and although it does look obvious, in other parts of the instructions the options can be less obvious. There's no symbol like other manufacturers might do to say this is an option. It talks about it here separately, so it's important that you read everything to not miss something that could become quite important. Such as, when no colour is specified, paint parts with the hull colour XF75. Now, Tamiya's more modern ship kits are multi-part construction when it comes to the hull, which is held together with an elaborate mechanical fastener system. It's a little bit overkill, and if you're not careful, you can over tighten the fasteners and create gaps in the fit. So tread carefully when you're putting the hull together and when you're putting the deck in, because you can force things apart. Then as we go over to our next steps, step 4 and 5 deal with the deck, and you can see the deck is being put in place with mechanical fasteners, which will get covered up later with superstructure. And that would be my preferred way of building it, putting the deck in before we start building superstructure, as opposed to some manufacturers that have you build the superstructure on the deck and then you've got to try and put it in, and you might have filling to do. Although it's unlikely on a Tamiya kit, they still don't do that. Then we're flipping it over on step 6, and we're adding all the sort of the running gear, the rudders and propeller shafts and the like. And then you've got a base that you can mount it on. She screws straight down into that. So at this stage, you've got quite a nice working platform if you wish, but notice that it screws from underneath, so you can add the stand at any time and keep her separate while you paint and weather her. So although we're 8 steps into the build, at this point you've painted the hull, you've painted the decks, and probably done your hull weathering before you even start building anything else. So quite a lot of work always with a ship's hull to get it where you want to be. Even if you're just doing a museum standard build without any weathering, there's quite a few steps in here, a lot of masking. So don't underestimate how much work there is just to get to putting the base on at step 8. Step 9, and we're putting in those torpedo tubes. You have an option, they're on poly caps, so you have an option to have them swung in or swung out. Once you've put the deck on above it though, you can't get those, or you can't easily get those torpedo tubes out. So even though they've been put on poly caps, which suggests they're movable, in reality you've got to decide how you want them at this point and pose them that way right from the off, because it is very difficult to get in even with tweezers, because you need to go in through this side opening. Now, not included in the kit, but if you wanted to, there is always the option of covering these with tarpaulins, which is how it was done on the original ship. These were not left open, so the elements was kept out by putting tarpaulins over the front, which kept this shelter deck nice and dry. You can also see we've got some torpedoes which go at the back. They can just about be seen from the ends looking through, but hardly visible. But yeah, they are there. Step 10, and we've got our upper deck going on, where the majority of our superstructure is going to end up being seated. We've got a little bit of drilling to do, and then in step 11 we're starting to populate what I tend to call the deck fittings. So everything from capstans, hose and cable reels, ventilators, pyrovanes, and the notorious and really horrid Tamiya plastic ladders. Now, there's two different views on the plastic ladders. There are people that prefer them because they don't like working with photo etch. Quite happy to put them on and accept that they don't look great, but it's the best solution for them as a modeler. And the other camp that I'm in, which is they look ugly, they detract from the model, and you need to put photo etch ones on. So at this point we're already saying need a little bit of aftermarket help. Step 12, and we're getting to the more familiar Tamiya style of really busy steps. So Tamiya models tend to have fewer steps than many models do these days, but they have a lot going on in their steps, and you know, I can see this as several steps already. So we've got a lot of ventilators going down, so that's one step. Then we've got the gun tubs which sit on the side going down. For me, that's another step. So you can see how you could break this down if you wanted to. The way Tamiya presents their instructions, it's very difficult to box things off and say, right, I'm going to give that a different step number. So, but for me and the way I work, because I like to break all the steps down into further steps and then resequence them to fit how I want to build it, I find Tamiya instructions quite difficult to work with. But as a standalone set of instructions, if you're going to follow them verbatim, then you have to carefully go through what you've got there and make sure you don't miss anything. But they are clear. It is telling you the part number, and you know that everything's the hull colour unless it tells you otherwise. Which it is doing here in step 13 when we've got a sampan being painted up and mounted on the side of the ship. And then we can see that being placed there. So that's our part, and that's our davit for it. We've got more ventilation going together, and then we've got some superstructure going down here. So we're starting to build up what this should look like, and actually the build process that Tamiya are taking us through is quite logical. It's the way I like to build, which is doing the low level stuff on the deck and then primarily building from the center up and out. Then if we go to step 14 and 15 on page 13, we're building up the funnel there. So they've done the pipe work on the outside separately, which is going to add to the end look of it, and it means we will have some nice, crisp, detailed moulding. We've got plastic funnel caps, and we do have a funnel cap interior, so even though the plastic, they'll still look relatively busy. Shows you a side-on view there, so you know which way it should look. You can get in with a knife and thin those out if you wish. And then in step 15, we're dealing with our first bit of photo etch, which is folding the cradles for the aircraft to sit on. And then we're doing a little bit more on the funnel. We've got photo etch going on there, little metal blanking plate sort of that joins the two funnels together, which are photo etch, and then more pipe work on the outside. Step 16 is dealing with the mast mounted crane. You can see the tripod being built up there, the mast at the bottom. We've got quite a bit of painting, different colours there, because we've got the lights there for the ship. There's the running lights and what have you to paint up. A little bit more superstructure. Looks like, well, they're calling it the aft bridge. So it looks like there's a direction finder on it and some bits and pieces. Then when we get to step 18, we're putting the two masts in. We've got our searchlights going in, being mounted on the platforms. Now, it doesn't look like it here, but that is a solid lump of plastic and it's not very attractive. So again, if you can find an aftermarket set for this, it's worth looking at. I'm fairly sure White Ensign models do one. Step 19, and we're building up our bridge. They have quite an interesting way of doing it with a central pillar that you build the levels on. And we can see here that the decks are all quite busy with direction finders and searchlights and as you have it. Then we've got here the observation deck with all the binoculars and a clear plastic bridge, which gives us some nice glazing to look through. We're doing some different colours here, painting the lights, the red and green lights there. We've got a little bit of secondary or minor armament, if you like, going on. And then we've got some more structure going on. So polycaps on the top there, so we can pose that in a direction, which is helpful if we want to pose the guns in direction. And then we've got some ladders at the back there. If we move to step 20, we can see we've got we're finishing some of the superstructure with anti-aircraft gun emplacements going in, and then we've got more guns going in. These were posable. Because of the way they're designed, you can pose those guns, you don't have to put them flat in. And then we've got more ventilation, which is going in there. Step 21 is largely the searchlight platforms going in. There's also some little walkways that go in. they're actually quite chunky. When we look at the plastic, you'll see they're quite chunky with big thick ladders at the end. So again, something to replace with a plastic card or thin down or aftermarket, whatever is your fancy. Then when we get to step 22, we're doing the bits that we are different to the Mogami that we built, because really from this point here is where the Mogami is different. So we've got the two main gun turrets going in. We've got lots of deck fittings and bits and pieces going in. And for me, I would actually do this right at the start when I'm doing the bow. I'd do the whole deck in one go, because we can paint all of the mushroom vents at the same time and get them in. So we can see that we've got some barrel lockers going in and various bits and pieces. Again, all the main guns on polycaps, some ladders, and we get this nice top-down view, which helps us with orientation of the parts, so I do like that. Okay, step 23, we're building up the primary armament here. So we've got 5 turrets to make in total, but I think we're just focusing on the forward 3 here. So what you can see, if you've not seen this system before, is the way Tamiya designed their guns with the blast bags moulded on. You can show them in 2 positions, so they're not multi-posable. You can show them fully elevated, or you can show them fully depressed. But what you can't do is show them in the middle. So you can't have one fully elevated, one halfway down, one fully depressed, which, you know, some modelers like to show the range or them in the process of firing. You can't do that. They plug into polycaps, so you can paint them separately, which is really handy because you can then put them in once the turret's been built. So the actual method of construction I really, really like, because all too often you're having to paint these things once the barrels have been put in place and you can't get to the back of them properly. And it becomes quite a difficult process. So the thought process behind the design I really like. What I'm less keen on is the fact that you've not got a full range of posability of the guns. And if you decide that you want to replace them with brass guns, for example, or some metal replacements, you're not getting around that problem because you're still having to plug into the blast bag. So unless you're in the up for making your own blast bags, it's very difficult to pose them differently, and then you're relying on whatever you've used to make the blast bag to hold it in place, because it's difficult to plug into those. So you have to modify that part, so it becomes a lot of work. It becomes a lot of work if you want to put your own barrels in and have them in a different pose. So yeah, something to look out for. Tamiya don't make that easy for you, although they do make it a lot easier to build it in the way it's designed. Front turrets just press in. We've got polycaps in there. We've got some anchor chain going on, which looks like it's some metal chain, to be honest. The anchors, the forward flagstaff there, and then of course we've got our chrysanthemum going on the front. In step 25, we've got the stern-facing guns going on. We've got some booms, the aft jack staff. Looks like our davits are folded down, so we don't have an option there, though you can modify them with a little bit of care. And then we've got a couple of photo etch parts, which are our propeller protectors there. So it's nice that they're photo etch, although the ones above the other propellers are moulded on. So why they didn't do photo etch for both, I'm not sure. But again, something to try and replace if you can. Then we're building up some of the secondary armament. In step 27, we're doing the ship's boats, and you can see there's a fair few of them being stacked up there. So they generally not too bad, Tamiya's ship's boats. But again, if you get an aftermarket set, you can probably enhance these. with oars and various handrails and the like. Steps 29 and 30 focus on the aircraft, and the aircraft all seem to be biplanes. So we've got what's that? A Kawanishi E7K and a Nakajima E8N. So I don't know those aircraft, to be honest, so I don't know what they are, but they're all biplanes. They look slightly different in some way, and we do have, lurking at this point in the instructions, a little correction leaflet. So that is for this one here. Let's see if we can spot the difference. Right, yeah. Okay, so they have P17 facing the wrong way on the instructions by the looks of it. Yeah, they have the tab facing forwards when it should be facing backwards. Okay, that seems to be the only thing, so it's a minor issue. We're then putting it onto the photo etch cradles, which in turn allows you to mount them onto their frames for moving them about, their bogies if you like, and you can position them wherever you want. Then we've got in step 31 we've got our catapults being built up and the turntables going in, which allows you to place these aircraft wherever you like. You could put them on the catapult as well, but they also supply you with some stands and quite sturdy metal rods, so that you can mount them and show them sort of flying. Now, if you don't want to use the metal rods, they're really handy for mounting small parts on for painting, because they are very strong. I think they're probably stainless steel. So yeah, that's a nice little tip. Don't chuck them away. You can use them for painting small parts, mount your part on them, and away you go. That completes our instructions. So let's have a look at what else we've got in there. Okay, next thing I've taken out of the box is the photo etch, and I think we can do this without opening the bag. There we go. So we've got a small amount of photo etch on here. Some of it is dealing with the framework of the masts. We've got the little plates that join the funnels there, and our propeller protector. Then we've got a couple of propellers for the aircraft, and our bogies for moving them around. I think that becomes part of the mast-mounted crane, and I think all of those parts do. And then we've got some twin propellers. Now, if you end up buying an aftermarket etch set, you might find that you're not using any of this because you're using the aftermarket set. If that's the case, then cut this up, and it makes some really great tools. Because of the photo etch material that Tamiya used, it's like a strong nickel plate. It's quite thick, and it's very sturdy, unlike the sort of the brass alloy alternatives that you can get. So you can cut this up and make some really nice tiny seam scraping tools. You can make glue applicators, you can make reamers, you can make all sorts with this photo etch. It's really handy. And as we've already discussed, these are our little metal rods for the aircraft. They give them actually some quite nice height. But like I say, you can keep hold of these. You can use the stands that come with them, and you've got some nice little rods for mounting small parts on for painting. They're really handy, and I've got quite a few of them. So next out is our base. So this base was a new tool, new design when they released these kits in 2009, and I do prefer it to their older version bases. So it's quite a nice base in its own right. You could actually get away with not painting it if you wanted to. And then where we've got these flats, rather than decals, we have stickers that go on there, or we certainly did in the Mogami. We'll test that later. We've got the little stands that go in there, and these mounting points. So these go into the pedestal, create a little pedestal there, and it looks really nice. These, which look like they've come from some strategy board game, these are the bases for your aircraft. So you can see the little dimple there, that's where the metal rod goes in. And like I say, quite handy for painting little parts if you wish. I'm going to go through the sprues in the order they're coming out of the box so that I can put it back in the same order. As always with Tamiya stuff, we've got mechanically fastened bags, which they have pluses and minuses doing it this way. It means that your bag doesn't get cut apart when you're opening it, so it's easier to get your sprues in and out. But if you don't remove the staples, you can scratch and damage your plastic taking it out, so you do have to be careful. But good reusable bag. So I tend to rebag anything that's not in multiple bags with spare bags from other kits as far as I can. Okay, so our first sprue out is sprue B. So we'll just give you an overall look of it first. So what we've got is the three lower deck sections which come together. So this is where our torpedo tubes will be mounted, and then we've got the two deck sections, bow and stern. Obviously we have a bit of a step down. You can see where it meets the barbettes there. Okay, so it's nicely moulded, it's nice and crisp. We've got no particular issues with flash. We'll have a close look in a minute. We've also got our propellers, our A-frames there for the propeller shafts, our rudders, and that's the little internal piece for locking in the polycaps for the rudders. And then we've got these hull braces which go on the inside, and you can see there's like a little join in them with a gap. That's to allow you to cut through. If you're just doing the waterline version, you don't need the bottom section. And then we've got our openings for the shaft lines to come out. I'm not quite sure what that part is, but as always, it's Tamiya plastic, so it's very nice. We've got quite a bit of heavy seam on the A-frame. So as we look at the A-frame there, we can see there's a little bit of sanding to be done, but definitely not as bad as a lot of manufacturers produce. As we look at the A-frames, they're actually pretty good in terms of seam. Quite often these parts have really heavy seam on them, but that's not the case with this. Propellers look nicely shaped. We've got some nice detail on the deck. Unfortunately, we've got some moulded in detail which would have benefited from being separate parts. And we've got the deck walkway covers closed with their little braces on the top there, but very delicately moulded, looks nice. Got some nice texturing on the steel decks. The hose pipe covers moulded in place. The bonnets, although they're solid, there's a hole just in front of them that allows the anchor chain to go through, so they'll look all right actually painted up. The bollards look a little bit heavy and obviously don't have their caps, so personal preference, but because of the way they're mounted with a little lip, if you look at the bollards there, you can see there's a little lip. You could carefully remove those and scratch build some replacements. And we've got a little bit of slide moulding done there for our shaft line openings. Very good. Okay, sprue L is the next one out of the box, and we've got more deck. So we've got the stern deck here, most of it being linoleum, but with a little bit of steel deck right at the end there. And then we've got this linoleum section of upper deck to go in. We've got some superstructure parts. We've got the anti-aircraft deck there, and you can see how chunky that is with the ladders there. So yeah, it for me it detracts, it does, and anyone who's been following the channel for a while knows that I always mention these plastic ladders. In fairness to Tamiya, they do a fairly good job of the plastic ladders. They're not really ugly things. They do have an edge, and you could put photo etch on and they'd look okay. But when they're triangular like that, it just doesn't look right. Having them separate would be an improvement on them being moulded in like that. Anyway, the superstructure detail, we've got some watertight doors which have got the rainaways above them. We've got some nice little detail on there, and some really lovely texturing in the ventilators. So that's done really nicely. I suspect those are windows, but they're moulded in plastic, so I would have preferred them to have been glazed, but I might be wrong, they might not be windows. We've got more ventilators there, main ventilators, all of them with lovely texture on, which is a little hard to see on camera, but I can feel it under my finger. And then we've got some separate ladders. Moving to this section, we've got more of the superstructure. The portholes there are nicely done with the rainaways above them, the little eyebrows. Nice texturing on the deck. Some very chunky ladders there. So that'll certainly benefit for replacement. And then we've got the end superstructure there with we've got what looks like a seam, but it's not a seam, it's grab rails which go around. So in really bad weather they could connect a tether to it and walk around the ship with a tether on to stop them being washed overboard. Then we've got our sampan. That is really nice actually. I can't remember, but I think that might even be nicer than the ones in the utility ship set that they do. Unfortunately, we've got a couple of ejector pin marks in there, which will detract a little bit, but you might be able to cover that up with, I don't know, some storage boxes, tarpaulins, oars, that sort of thing. Not quite sure what that is. Is it a paravane? Don't think so. Not quite sure what that is. And then we've got some of the pipework that will be ending up on the funnel there, which have nicely moulded openings in the top. So yeah, all very, very nice. Let's just take you through those parts. One of the things that Tamiya does, and it annoys me no end, is they give you some cable reels separately to mount on, and then they mould some in. And the moulded on ones look dreadful because they can't possibly mould them accurately. So why they don't do those as separate parts, I don't know. Next out of the box is sprue N, and we have two of these, as you can see. And this is focused on, it's sprue N and sprue P, so we've got two sets of both of those. So we've got main guns on this side, and then we've got aircraft on this side, and catapult parts. So if we have a look at our guns first, we can also see we've got some of the separate cable reels, and you can see how they're better. You've got a gap underneath them, which makes them look more authentic, and they're completely spherical and so on. So yeah, we've got some of our anti-aircraft guns there that we can build up later on, and then we've got our guns, which are in two different poses, as we talked about in our instructions. So you can see how these are a lot easier to paint in terms of the blast bags. They are solid barrels, which some people will dislike, but the blast bags look really nice. They're easy to clean up, so I don't have a real problem with them as far as plastic gun barrels go. The turrets themselves are very nicely detailed. They look really good. They do lack the grab handles and bits and pieces. Again, you're going to have to find some aftermarket to up the game of these, but in their own right, building them as plastic parts only, they look okay. They've got ladders moulded on the side, and then these are our bases. If we move over to this sprue, we've got our aircraft here. So that's not an aircraft that was on the Mogami I built. In fact, I've never seen that one before, so it's quite nice to have something a little bit different. You can see our struts there. They are nice and strong and solid, and they won't give you any issues, but they are a little bit thick and overscale. They've done a good job of getting them small as they can. We've got lots of nice detail on the aircraft and the wings there, the tail there. It's all raised detail, which may be right, I don't know. And then on the floats, that's recessed detail, so I'm sure they know what they're doing. And then we've got this other aircraft here. It's a single piece fuselage with separate wheels, and that comes out really quite nicely. Some careful painting to pick out the windshields and what have you, and they should look really quite nice. They're both open cockpit, interestingly. Then we've got the plastic parts which go onto the aircraft bogies. Yeah, all very nice. And then parts for our catapults, which I've got to say are moulded really, really nicely. There's some real finesse in there. And look how crisp they are. You've got no clean up there. You don't need to be trying to get in between and get the seam out. It's a really, really nice job. Tamiya at its best, that. See the detail on the aircraft. There's our guns. No issues with any of that at all. All very nice. Our clear parts now, and they are really nicely done. I hadn't mentioned it when we went through the instructions, but you can see we've got clear lenses for our searchlights. There's pros and cons to these because they're moulded with the frames on the front. So they're quite difficult to paint. What I would suggest is if you can get photo etch replacements, you sand these flush and polish them up, and then attach your photo etch on top. Then we've got two glass sections for the bridge. There is a reason why there's two, and I can't remember what it is. But you can see here where it says the PS. If you look at Tamiya sprues, most of them, not all, most of them will have PS on, which means they're a form of polystyrene, and they are recyclable if they've got that on. Whether you can get them recycled is a different thing, but do put them in your recycling and give yourself sprue C now, and we've mainly got stuff for the funnel. There is some superstructure as well, and some the gun tubs, the deck gun tubs, but most of this is the funnel. So the funnel is primarily a two-part construction with the ventilators already moulded in and what have you. We have these little sections which go on this section here, just to separate them on the way out. They're sort of a Y shape, but you've got lovely detail on that. Obviously, aftermarket again would replace these lines with actual grab rails and things, which would add to the detail. But yeah, they're nicely moulded, and we can see we've got some nice location points for our photo etch. We've got ventilators that go onto these parts, so the parts are close to each other. Those go on there, for example. You can see they go into those parts with, again, nice texturing. We've got the deck booms that go on the stern there, and then these are the bases for the searchlight platforms, and you can see it's a big chunky bit of plastic. It's not very attractive. Then we've got some of the mast tripod legs. Rangefinder has quite a heavy seam through it. Don't know if the camera can pick that up. There you go. So a bit of clean up on that part. Yeah, we've got some nice texturing on the shelter deck there, but also, I mean, that's our upper face, and we've got all the ejector pins on there, so that's a shame. I don't know why they didn't flip that round. Oh well, it is what it is. Again, main ventilators, casing and fronts, nice texturing on there. We've got steel and linoleum decks on this part, all nicely done, although no texturing in the gun tubs, and the gun tub walls do look quite chunky, but whether we can get in there and thin them out a little bit, don't know. This is our internal piece that the bridge gets built up on, and these are the platforms we talked about in the instructions, so you can see they're really quite thick and chunky, and the ladders obviously help with that chunky feel. So if you can replace those, because they are a perforated steel deck, if you can get replacements for those, do so. But from the plastic part point of view, really nice. Here's our funnel caps, and you can see when they're painted up, they're going to look perfectly good. So if you're in the market for building it from just from the plastic, they've done a really good job of what they've presented. Sprue H now, and again we've got two of these, so we'll just put one to the side. And we've got all sorts of bits on here. We've got a lot of our small parts, so if we start in this corner here, we've got anti-aircraft guns, we've got rangefinders and directors, we've got signal lamps, which have got a huge amount of zinc in them. They look pretty poor, actually. We've got our little davits in there stowed away. So probably better if you want to mount a ship on them, to just cut them at the join there. Basically, there's on the real thing there's a hinge, and it hinges open, and you put a peg in it. So you then take the peg out, hinge it back up, put the peg in it, and it's a two-position pin hinge. So you can cut it at that point, and then just sand it away a tiny fraction, put them upright, glue it back on, and it's done. So you can reposition these. You don't have to have them stowed away. So yeah, then we've got a lot of our mushroom vents, and they're always quite nicely done. Although unfortunately what Tamiya do is they put the sprue gate on the forward face where you'd expect there to be a grill, so you don't get any of that, but the payback is you've got a flat surface for sanding. So yeah, you also get quite a bit of seam on these, so there's a lot of work on the vents to sort them out, to be honest. Then we've got all our binoculars, lots of those, and then various anchors. Then we've got some secondary armament. We've got the backs and the main mounts for the searchlights, our turntables there for the aircraft tracks, And then we've got, not quite sure what those are, some ladders, our torpedoes and torpedo tubes. And you can see on the torpedoes are moulded into the base of the torpedo launchers. So effectively they are shown with torpedoes already loaded into them. Then we've got our turret parts for our secondary armament. We've got another ship's boat there, another sampan, which is nicely done. And we're moving into ship's boats territory, and we'll talk about ship's boats in a minute, so I'll have a look at the other stuff first. So we've got ventilators, we've got more davits, these ones in the locked up position. Again, you can cut them, you can see the pins on these actually, just there. You get something to point with. So you can just about see the pins there. So you can cut it at that point where the pins are and hinge it down if you wish. Then we've got, this goes on the mast, it's our navigation lights. We've got the bases for the other search lamps, and again solid plastic, not great to look at. Some more hose reels and some blanking plates there, and our pyrovanes, which look really nice. Now when we come to look at the ship's boats, the hulls of these are nicely depicted. You've got engraved lines to show you the planking, and then the others are totally smooth as they should be. We've got the little bump bags on them, and when you flip them over you've got the wood effects on the inside, although unfortunately you've got the ejector pins. Now they're quite easy to sort out in a way. What you do is you put a little dollop of extra thin glue in there which softens the plastic, and then run a knife through in using the lines that are there, and you can just scribe it back in. So you can sort it out. It's not perfect, it's not really massively ideal, but it does work okay, and you can see why some companies prefer to do them in two halves, even on these smaller boats, because you can then hide them away. When it comes to these boats here, we've got the motor there, which is okay, and then you've got a textured deck, and again you've got a ejector pin that you're going to have to sort. We've got the little covers that go over top, but they don't have the windows in. They did actually have little windows in the side. Tamiya never depict those really. And then the biggest issue I've got is with these. Don't they look dreadful? Absolutely shocking. I don't know why they do that. They've got no need to do that. They could do those as separate parts and make them look a lot bigger. But that massive wedge, this gets mounted onto the top of another boat, and that massive wedge of plastic massively detracts. And I'm not even sure if they sort of do it deliberately, so you go out and buy the utility set, so you have to buy that boat again, but without any of that on, so you can mount it yourself. But you've still got, you know, source mounts and bits and pieces. So I don't know if they do it for that reason, to make you buy another set, then I don't think that's right. But either way, Tamiya do this in all of their ship kits, and it's awful, and they need to stop doing it. This in itself isn't too bad. The windows are never brilliantly depicted, but once painted up look okay. But they're sort of, the framework is thicker at the bottom than it is at the top. At the top it's quite thin, and that's to do with how they remove the plastic from the tool. But everything's crisp, no flash, just a little bit of cleanup and away you go. So all in all, really, really nice. Just a couple of niggles. There's no such thing as perfect kit. I've never seen a perfect kit yet. Sprue M now, and the difference with this is we're no longer looking at a polystyrene sprue. If we just flip it over, we can see that the material is ABS. And Tamiya do this, it's a really lovely thing that they do. They do this because this is a harder plastic again, and what you can see is they're fine detailed parts, the pipe work, the masts, have been done in the ABS to give them additional strength. They're less likely to snap. If you bend them, they're less likely to break, and that, you know, it's just a really nice little touch. Tamiya have done that in their more recent ship kits. So if you were to buy their really expensive Yamato set at 1350, you'd have ABS in there as well. Really nicely done. You've got all the nice little openings on the pipework there, and you've got the little lamps and bits and pieces on your yard arms. It makes it also, because it's ABS, makes it stronger for rigging, which is helpful depending on what material you're using. We can see the base of our mast here where the crane boom comes from. That being sold as a solid lump, again, for some people that detracts, but we'll talk about that at the end of the video. You've got the radio loop there, which has got openings on one side, which looks really, really nice, and then on the other side it's solid. So it's a bit of a shame, but there's no other way they could have done it, I don't think. So yeah, that's it. Quite a small sprue, but it's lovely that they go to the extra trouble of the extra material, albeit it'll be a little bit more expensive. It's worth it to help the modeler out, and that I love. One last thing to say is this is part of the mast build-up, and there is no texturing on these little platforms. So next out of the bag, sprue A, is our hull sides, and you can see there we get two of those on a really sturdy, well-designed frame. Nobody else does it quite like this. So you've got the frame going with the direction of the hull, and then they've put this extra frame on, so you can put it flat, and it's nice and strong. It's a really good bit of engineering. So if we start right at the bow, we can see that we've got weld seams, which are really nice for showing the run of our plating. You can also see a little bit of release agent there. And we've got our towing, and all the front end is very nicely moulded. Then we get to our scuttles, and some people like to drill them out, some people don't. It's all personal preference. These are quite shallow, but will look right when you've painted them. They're sort of to scale, if that makes sense, if you're not going to drill them out. They've got their eyebrows as well, and none of them are elongated, but just look at that curve. It's they've really got the shape of the bow really nice, and it'll be nice and thin because it's two parts. We can see the start of our torpedo bulge there, so that follows along. Then we've got our little chutes, our waste chutes, which look nicely done as well. There seems to be some form of texturing and catching in the light, whether that's just in the... I can't feel it, but it looks like there's a texture in the light. We've got our hand rungs moulded in, which of course we can replace, and we've got a little crane boom there, and then we've got our openings for the torpedoes, and this little opening here you probably want to drill out. It's a lines go through there, and like I say, you could put tarpaulins over there to cover them. That would be a nice little effect. Then we've got quite a few scuttles running down here, and then more hand rungs. No sink. I think it's just clean up the sprue gates and away you go. So both sides the same. It's really, really nicely done. Yeah, Tamiya does a really good job of its ship's hulls. Then we've got our two lower hulls, which are done in a red plastic. So if you're a fairly novice modeller, there is actually nothing stopping you from building this without painting it, and it would look okay, because effectively Imperial Japanese ships are the easiest ships to paint, because everything is one grey colour other than under the hull. The only thing I would say is that the linoleum deck should be brown, and you won't get that if you don't paint it. But you could, if this was your first model, you could just knock this together, build it only, and just have it in its natural state, and it'd look all right. It would. So you get two hulls. You get a waterline and you get a full hull. If we look at, I'm not going to take the waterline one out of the bag. It's just a flat plate, effectively. But I did want to show you that even though it's a waterline, they have got them the little nut location points, which allows you to attach it to the base. So you could do it waterline and attach it to the base if you wanted to. I think it'd look a bit strange, but it's doable. So this is our one-piece lower hull, done in almost the right colour for the anti-fouling red of the Imperial Japanese Navy. And what is interesting, because we had this debate on the 1-200 Yamato that was released recently. What is interesting is on the bow here, we've got hydrophones moulded in. I'm fairly sure that wasn't done on the Mogami, so that is something different. So that is really interesting. And it's sort of in the location that we'd expect it to be. So yeah, that is definitely hydrophones. Really interesting, because I've really struggled to find much information about Japanese Navy hydrophones. We do have a bit of a seam here at the front. We can see quite a thick seam that's going to have to be sanded away, but we've got a lovely narrow pointy hull there, so that's nice. It looks like we might have sink, but it might also just be the way the plastic's mixed when it's been moulded. Now this is slide moulded, so what you get, see if we can do it in the light, what you get is, get my pointy tweezers, where this seam terminates here, you'll then get a slide moulding seam which goes across the weld seams, goes up to the weld seam here, which is a really nice touch, clever engineering, and then here it crosses the next weld seam and follows along, and then at this point here it terminates off and goes to your bilge keel here, and then follows the line of the bilge keel, comes out the back of the bilge keel, you can see it's there, it crosses the welded seam line, you can see it's going all the way across there, drops down from your hull bulge, and then crosses up to the next weld seam. So you have to go through the hull very, very carefully to remove the seam. If you don't, it's really obvious. So you can see it in the light now. It is very pronounced, particularly when you come out of the stern side of the bilge keel. Do not mistake it for being part of the ship's hull plating. It is not. The hull plating seams run in an equal distance, and they run in that direction in a straight line. So anything that's not in a straight line running in that direction should not be on there, and it's part of the process of moulding it. So the point of doing slide moulding on something like this is that you are moulding in multiple directions at once, which gives you some real crisp, accurate finesse in your detail.
The downside is you get this extra seam, and on these hulls, because they put so much detail on with all the seam lines, which looks really nice, it does mean you've got a lot of very careful scraping away. I wouldn't even sand it, it's because you're going to risk damaging the really fine, lovely seam lines that they're put in. So you're going to have to go in with a scraper and really do a good job of that. What you can do is cut a bit of your frame from your photo etch away, make a short little scraper, and you can just scrape it away using that. So you've actually got everything in the box that you need. But yeah, we've got the little details on the bottom there. We can see our location points for the propellers and the rudders, and it does look really, really nice. I don't think anyone does a hull quite as good as Tamiya, in fairness, but there is more work involved in getting it right. And we can see on our bilge keels what they've done. They've put a little step in. Can you see it there in the light? I'm just running my fingernail along it, just to make that a little bit thinner. So it does look really nice. And when you look at it, it looks the part. It really does look good. I'm not sure why, when you've got something this lovely, you'd want to do a waterline version, as that is going to look really, really good when cleaned up. Yeah, really happy with that. Then we have our typical for Tamiya bag of parts. So we get one of these screwdrivers with the little spinny head. I sort of miss the little clear red handled plastic ones they used to do, the little dinky ones. I'm sure I've got a couple somewhere, but these are really, really good for doing like your remote control backs, where you've got those tiny little screws. They're really handy for that. So don't throw it away when you've done with it. They're really handy screwdrivers. Even though I've got several of them now, I still don't throw them away. So we've got our shaft lines there, which are stainless steel, and we can just plop in place. We've got our different sizes of poly caps, our metal clips for fitting the hull and the braces inside the hull together, our mechanical fasteners and nuts and bits and pieces that are used throughout the build, larger poly caps at the top, and our anchor chain. I find that Tamiya's anchor chain is a little bit shiny, so dulling it down with some matte varnish is helpful if you're not going to weather it. But that is all of our bag of parts. I'm going to leave them sealed up for obvious reasons. The next bag out has our various markings, stickers, decals and the like. So let's just go through those. So the first one on the top is our tissue paper flags. Personally, not a fan of them at all. You've got to do a really spot on job of lining them up not to see a witness of the print on the other side when you fold them over. I don't think they actually look particularly realistic as a flag, and you've got this black border which you wouldn't have on the actual flag. So all in all, I'm not a fan of these, and replacing them with something else is always preferable. I would prefer it if they did it as a decal. If they did it as a decal, you could put it on some tin foil and animate it, and you can do a really nice job. That I'm not going to chuck away. I will keep that because I've got a diorama, a 172 diorama that I'm going to be building at some point, and the flags could be handy for that. So I'm going to keep them, but we're not going to use them on the ship build. Then we have our decal sheet, and they often seem to do this, the decal sheet and the protective cover for the decal sheet never appear to be the same size with Tamiya kits. Don't know why. And they don't attach it, so they become separated, so it doesn't really do much. So we have our usual underwhelming decals from Tamiya. And when I say underwhelming, I mean underwhelming in more ways than one. This is the totality of the decals for our ship. There's no depth markings, and I think everyone knew I was about to say that. If you've seen my reviews before, it's something that winds me up no end. All ships have depth markings. Why didn't almost nobody put them in their decals? Almost all of this is aircraft decals. So we've got our sunspots there for the wings and what have you. We've got the little stripes for the tails, which is nice. We've got the stern marking in gold, which is nice. And then we've got all these little numbers, and I think they're probably for the ship's boats, are they? Not quite sure. And that's it. So for me, the flags should be decals as well. For me, also, there would be markings probably on the funnels, probably on the turrets, which they could definitely do as decals at this scale. So there's just not enough in the way of decals. If Airfix had done this, it'd be a great big sheet with warning signs and all sorts of stuff on. So Tamiya's decals, when it comes to ships, are never good enough, and their decals are awful. They're so thick, they really are. I might be tempted to use to paint the rising suns on, and with these things, my past experience has been that the decals are so oversized that they don't look great when they're on anyway. So you're doing a lot of trimming once you've got them in place and they're dried, and it's just not a nice experience, the decals from Tamiya. I'm not a fan. And finally, we have our stickers for the base, which is done really nice. Basically, you've got the same wording in Japanese as you've got in English. I once joked that it could say anything in there and I wouldn't know, and someone quite politely told me that it says exactly the same thing, just in Japanese. So I'm sure that's the case, but I don't know really for sure. Our final item out of the box, and I always love this, is our little paint sheet. I think they are absolutely stunning little things that they do here. And it is to scale, which is why I can't get it all on camera. It's really nice. It clearly shows you what should be painted. Not that the painting of a IJN ship is particularly complex, but gives you a good view of what everything should look like. Interestingly, when it comes to our aircraft, these have got camouflage schemes. So some quite intricate painting required on the aircraft, which on them when we did the Mogami wasn't needed because it was all over green with the lower pale colour. So that looks really nice. Tells you when you should have your flag on if you're depicting it in an ocean scene, for example. And then if we flip it over, we have the arrangement showing the aircraft in place and our ship's boats and what have you. And it's telling us what things are: swing boom, rail, multi-purpose washing area. Okay. There you go, a multi-purpose washing area. I did wonder what that was, and then I thought, well, I'll do some research come the time, but now I know. And it's nice that Tamiya do that. They take you through what it is. So I think these are really quite nice to put up on the wall when you've done. They do look really nice. So there you go. That's our painting instructions. Effectively, even though it's given to you all the way through the build. It's a nice little addition, and it does show you the positions of the ship's boats and things, and gives you some options. So yeah, I quite like that. So there we have it, Tamiya's 1:350 scale Japanese Imperial Navy light cruiser Mikuma. What are my first impressions? Let's start with the subject matter. I think it's really nice that we have a cruiser in the range of ship kits from Tamiya. So many companies just focus on the big capital ships, so it's nice to see something else. And it's an easy kit for Tamiya to do when they've done the Mogami, because there's a lot of common parts. So you can see why they've done it, and the result is actually a very nice model. Now, if you've never built a model ship before, you'd do well to build a Tamiya ship as your first ship. Just because it's Tamiya, the engineering is such that it will just slot together. It won't give you any difficulties in the build. It will go together like a dream. As long as you clean parts up properly, you won't have any issues. I think Tamiya do a really good job in certain places, and they do a really poor job in other places. And as I said during the review, there's no such thing as a perfect kit. And I think some people think I've been a little bit harsh on Tamiya ship kits in the past. And I disagree, and I'll tell you why I disagree. I don't think Tamiya have travelled far enough with their ship kits compared to their aircraft kits, or even their armour kits, but particularly their aircraft kits. When you see how far they've travelled since the 1970s with aircraft and with 1 to 35 scale armour, they haven't travelled the same distance with their ship kits. So you've still got moulded on detail hose reels that could be separate parts and would look better. You've still got thick, clunky ladders when they could put their own photo etch ones in. You're talking about half a dozen ladders at the most, and it would make such a difference. The same with the walkway. Why is that in plastic when it could be in photo etch? So Tamiya could do just a bit more, and it would make a massive difference to the overall finish of the model. Now, having said that, that it may well be that Tamiya look at a price point and they decide this is the balance, this is the payoff. To make it affordable for most people, we need to make these plastic parts as best we can and leave them as plastic. That might be the case, and that's what Tamiya decide to do. If you're just in the market to build a model of a ship, then there's nothing wrong with building a Tamiya model ship. They are lovely kits, they go together well, they've got lots of detail, and under some paint techniques of washers and dry brushes and the like, you can get something that looks really, really nice. And if you just paint them straight, unweathered, they do a nice museum piece. If you're in the market for doing an accurate model of a ship, then the Tamiya kits are a little bit clunky in places. Some of the details are a bit thick and could look better. There's chunky bits of plastic where you want a bit more finesse. So you do need the aftermarket photo etch set for it. I haven't got aftermarket for this at the moment. I'm probably going to get the white Ensign Models etch for this, in fairness. And that gives me the whole range of the Mogami light cruisers in one frame. So I think it's a lovely model. I think it'll go together well. I think the detail's really nice, but there is definitely more that you can do to bring this to life, and there's no rigging plan. And as always, the decals are a bit of a disappointment and the low life. I hope that was interesting. You now know what you get in the kit. You enjoy your modelling, and I'll see you very soon.